Brendan, with all due respect, like, you're not an afterthought for us. Like,
I'm definitely not a psychopath if I talk calmly, Brendan.
why would we as a company just dedicate 5-6 years to this harassment on
Reddit.
Have you seen your Reddit?
It's pretty malicious.
Yeah.
He's attacking me. He just did this.
Dicey.
Brendan Schaub is what happens when the guy with entrepreneur in his Instagram bio actually manages to become famous. He's confident enough to try everything all at once, but not actually humble enough to get good at anything. He's the type to speak from a position of expertise about a variety of topics without knowing what he's talking about 90% of the time.
Who do you think's the best stand-up comedian on earth right now? Bill Burr, Dave Attell, I think Big J Okerson, Louis C.K.
You like him twice, you put him on twice.
So Bill Burr.
The type to buy a $400 pair of shoes just so he can call himself a sneakerhead.
Now, are these all sick?
They're pretty sick.
So do you describe them as sick or
Dope.
Of course, if the ultimate goal of being a comedian is getting a large group of people to laugh in unison, then Brendan Schaub is an absolute prodigy because he's managed to bring together over 100,000 people to make fun of just about everything that he does. The Fighter and the Kid community on Reddit is a perfect example of how nothing brings people together than mutual hatred of another person, and while a good chunk of what gets posted there is pretty creative and hilarious, I have to say, some of it is just cruel. Does Brendan Schaub deserve it? The internet seems to think so. I'll give you my personal opinion in a bit, but first let's talk about how it got to that place to begin with. We were first introduced to Brendan Schaub on season 10 of The Ultimate Fighter, which was widely regarded as one of the best and most entertaining seasons of the show. It was coached by Rashad Evans and fan favorite Quentin Rampage Jackson, who would go back and forth in a series of awkward and unintentionally hilarious confrontations.
You know what sucks about that? It shows everybody how cheap our doors are.
In addition, it was the heavyweight season and included marquee names like Roy Nelson, who by that time had already made a name for himself in IFL and Elite XC, Matt Mitrione, who would go on to defeat Derek Lewis, Gabriel Gonzaga, and the ghost of Fedor Emelianenko, and a surprise entry of street fighting legend Kimbo Slice. Brendan made it all the way to the series finale, but ended up being on the receiving end of a knockout of the night earning shot courtesy of Roy Nelson, but proved himself to be a proficient enough fighter to earn a contract with the UFC. There are a lot of things that you can make fun of Brendan Schaub for, in fact, just about everything. But in my opinion, his fighting career isn't one, not that it stops people. As I see it, he was a legit fighter. He was ranked, he beat some decent guys like Matt Mitrione and Mirko Krokop, who many consider to be a legend, even if it was on the downslide of his career, and the fact that he got knocked out regularly himself isn't anything to be ashamed of. It happens to a lot of fighters, especially a heavyweight. Andrei Arlovski got some of the best sleep of his life inside of that octagon, and nobody seems to hold that against him. I have to say though, one of the best laughs of my life was watching a video of Brendan Schaub getting knocked out and seeing the people repeatedly commenting, "Gadoosh, gadoosh." It was one of those unexpected jokes that caught me completely off guard, since Brandon wasn't yet the laughingstock that he eventually became, and it got me good. But besides a couple of jabs here and there relating to his performances that all fighters seem to get, Brandon was actually relatively well liked at the time. I know it's hard to believe now, but he had a completely different image. I mean, just look at the guy. He doesn't even seem like the same person. In shape, dedicated to his craft, focused. These days, your eyes water just looking at him. He's so bloated that it looks like the air around him is salty. But in 2014, as his fighting career was coming to a halt, Brandon accrued a whole new audience when he began appearing on the Joe Rogan Experience alongside comedian and Matt TV alumni Brian Callen. The two hosted a podcast together called Fighter and the Kid, with the fighter referring to Brandon and the kid perplexingly referring to, at the time, 47-year-old Brian Callen.
Who calls you the kid? He's like, everybody around Hollywood. 2 years later, I'm talking with him, I'm like, they call you the kid on the set? He's like, no, nobody calls me that. That's what you told me. He goes, oh, I made that up. I thought it'd be cool if they did.
Brandon quickly became friends with Joe, who would often compliment him on his comedic ability, and by the end of the year, he would retire from fighting completely to pursue podcasting full time.
And nobody else had a podcast. Like the first time a fighter and a comic got together, like an athlete, professional athlete and comic got together. Now there's so many.
The retirement was expedited by Joe Rogan, who somewhat controversially laid into Brandon live on his podcast after his loss to Travis Brown about his future as a fighter, telling him that he wasn't good enough to beat the best in his weight class and suggesting that he should call it quits as Brandon fought back tears.
If you had a wrestling match with Cain Velasquez, how well do you think you'd do?
Straight up wrestling?
Yeah.
I think people would be surprised.
Really? You think so? Mm-hmm. I think you'd be surprised. I really do. I think he'd f you up.
Some people applaud Rogan for telling his friend the truth and keeping it real, but to be honest with you, I feel like this was a pretty low and classless thing to do. Joe could have easily told him that behind the scenes and it would have went over just as well. I think Joe just wanted to play the role of the brutally honest friend that day, but the thing about people that are brutally honest, they take a lot more joy in being brutal than being honest. Joe realized that Brandon respected him enough and had a soft enough personality where he wouldn't give him any real pushback to anything that he was telling him, so he chose to take an approach that would make it look like he was fearlessly sitting down the big bad heavyweight fighter and telling him the harsh realities of life regardless of how he might react. In reality, I don't for 1 second believe that Joe would have had the balls to say something like that to a guy like Nate Diaz or Rampage Jackson or Michael Bisping or Conor McGregor if they were sitting in front of him that day at any point in their careers. And I like Rogan, but I also recognize that we all have an ego and sometimes act in ways that aren't always right because of it. And on that day, what Joe did simply wasn't right. And he's been pretty apologetic over it since, so I think he feels the same way, at least a little.
I know that I was a dick to you to get you to stop doing it, but I felt like there was almost no other way.
I was at this party over here and guys were getting CT and, you know, you're fighting and it's a fucking grind. And then you guys were over here. I'm like, well, I want to be one of them. I'm good, man. I'm good. I want to do that.
And how did you get that confidence? Did you think it came from like you starting from fighting? Because bro, like you're in this industry, but like for example, I've been in this industry for like 10 years and I told everybody this year, I go, this is the year that I found myself. Like I figured it out. What year did it click for you? You're like, no, listening to anybody, I'm going to do it exactly how I want to do it.
From day one.
And it was at this point that things began to go downhill. He became cocky and arrogant, fully buying into his own hype. He really began to believe that he was this beast of a comedian that was an assassin at the Comedy Store. And the fans noticed. Here's a comment from the Fighter and the Kid subreddit from 2018 that perfectly describes what I mean. He's a social experiment of what happens when a person gets some fame and money. He's morphed into a terrible person. Obviously, I don't know him personally, but it's pretty obvious just by looking at his content over the years. The Fighter and the Kid in the beginning versus the Fighter and the Kid today is night and day, and it's not because of Callan. Now is probably a good time to try and describe what the Fighter and the Kid subreddit actually is. For those that don't know, Reddit is a huge internet forum founded by Alexis Ohanian and friends in 2005. You might know him as Serena Williams' husband. On this forum, people are able to create communities or subreddits dedicated to anything really. There are subreddits for everything from news to comedy to self-published horror stories to people flashing their camera at work. Currently, there are over 2.8 million subreddits. Generally speaking, when somebody is famous enough, a fan will create a subreddit for them to discuss their content, and that's what happened with the Fighter and the Kid. It was initially created as a fan page by BlahBlag12321 in order to discuss the podcast and also to collect the episodes in the same place since they were not always uploaded to the same platform. About a year into its existence, Schaub's behavior led to the members of the sub getting annoyed and ragging on him with memes and jokes at his expense. And his inability to receive criticism, viewing it as jealousy because he, quote, looks like your high school bully as opposed to legitimate concerns, ignoring comments, and generally treating the Fighter and the Kid fanbase like they were brainless groupies that should stay in their lane since they don't understand what it takes to be successful, led to them turning on him completely. It was this rant in particular that defined the movement.
But for the people that are negative or are on forums and are create troll accounts, I view those people the same I'd view a homeless guy critiquing my art or critiquing my set or critiquing a podcast. They do not matter. What do you care? It'd be the same as if a cat created a profile.
That's a good example.
Who cares?
A cat.
Members of the Fighter and the Kid subreddit began to refer to themselves as homeless cats, and the hate being served as dishes from P.F. Chang's. There was a lot to hate on too, even if you excluded his reaction to criticism. His stand-up comedy, something that he seemed to be on such a high horse about, turned out to be absolutely atrocious, with his first special, You'd Be Surprised, receiving one of the worst IMDb ratings in history, rivaled only by his second special, Gringo Papi. And it didn't help that Brandon Schaub was extremely easy to make fun of. He often mispronounced words, effortlessly creating Chauvinisms.
The preponderance of the UFC fans are Trump supporters. We have some acquaintances won Super Bowls.
He won Super Bowls, okay?
Yeah.
That's not anything.
Contradicted himself and told obvious lies, along with dressing like a starter pack for a typical LA douchebag. And while he proved to be a horrible stand-up comedian, he was an absolutely legendary unintentional comedian.
I still have to do this thing.
Check that box.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to check that.
I would
go up there and like feel it for the high level.
Yeah, listen, for me as a fan, I'd love to see you fight John Africa. I'd love to see you fight Tyson Fury whenever that happens. I'd love, now that MMA's legalized in France, I'd love to see UFC in France.
Who the hell is John Africa?
No, fighting John.
And as of 2023, the Fighter and the Kid subreddit is one of the largest subs dedicated to a podcast with over 100,000 members. To be fair, there are a lot of comics in LA that aren't that funny yet act like entitled douchebags, so you may be wondering why Brandon specifically. To be honest, I sometimes wonder that myself, and I'll address that in more detail soon. But to put it simply, the subreddit as a collective considers Brandon Schaub to be an objectively bad person. They find him to be materialistic, a bad husband, a bad friend, a bad boss, a tryhard, a show-off, and a liar, and because of that, they think that any personal attacks against him are fair game. He also urinates in the sink in his studio where people store their coffee cups. I don't know what category that falls under, but I feel like it hits the trifecta of being a bad boss, a bad friend, and an unintentional comedian all at once.
My Twitter feed lit up a little bit more to say, don't go to the bathroom there because you in the sink.
Where?
What? They said that you said this out loud.
Wait,
Does he in the sink
don't
here?
go to, I've done it
never
maybe
seen it.
once.
Okay, but
The worst confirmed thing that Brandon has done is try to cheat on his wife with Khalyla Kun, the longtime girlfriend of comedian Bobby Lee. Besides the being married part, this was particularly low because Bobby was a friend of Bryan Callen since the two were castmates on Mad TV and appeared on Fighter and the Kid. In fact, if you visit the official Fighter and the Kid YouTube channel, a clip from Bobby's appearance in 2017 is the most viewed video on the channel, and the full appearance itself is the fourth most viewed video on the channel. So he helped Brandon out a lot, and instead of, I don't know, trying to do something nice for the guy in return, he decides to try and bang his girl. So the situation came to a head in 2022 after Khalyla exposed his attempts in the conversation with comedian Annie Letterman on their podcast Trash Tuesdays. While his name was never mentioned, the context clues given directly pointed to Brandon.
I finished my spot being very good at comedy, you not being good at comedy. And then
that's a clue.
It was a comedian that wasn't funny who drove a huge truck and had the initials BS, not exactly rocket science. People online quickly connected the dots, and Brandon felt like he had to do something about it. He got on the three-way call with Bobby Lee and Bryan Callen, and the two apparently proceeded to threaten Bobby. Imagine that, you try to sleep with a guy's girlfriend behind his back and then have the nerve to threaten him like, hey bro, you better take care of your girlfriend trying to expose me for trying to bang her behind your back. Like, how is Bobby Lee supposed to receive that? He goes on the guy's show thinking they're friends, helps him get viewers, jokes around with him, and in return, Brandon slides into his girlfriend's DMs on Instagram, basically showing with his actions that Bobby's friendship means absolutely nothing to him and he has no respect for him as a man or just a human being, and after all of that, has the nerve to get mad at Bobby because Bobby couldn't stop Khalyla from exposing him. The three eventually met up face to face on Bobby and Khalyla's podcast Tiger Belly and had an incredibly awkward hour-and-a-half conversation. Khalyla was generally on the attack, and Brandon was relatively apologetic while briefly implying that Bobby and Khalyla might have had something to do with the Fighter and the Kid subreddit being co-opted by hateful trolls, even claiming that he had compiled 300 pages of evidence through a shadowy and mysterious independent source, not unlike the FBI or the CIA.
I'll show you the stuff that I have. Again, I don't think it's you
Will you
guys.
show me now?
I'll show you when
We'll
got.
we'll blur this off because we want to know. Because like
I'll show you. I have to
I
show.
want the audience
let me
to
get.
think
Let
that
me.
you actually showed us something you never did.
Well, yeah, I can show it to you. Here's the thing.
If Brandon had any type of critical thinking skills, he wouldn't have even wasted his time with that. Because if you actually visit the subreddit, it becomes very clear very quickly that this is not a case of just a couple of anonymous trolls posting a bunch of mean things about him in an otherwise friendly and uplifting community. Every single thing posted there is taking digs at him in some way, shape, or form. If somebody actually wanted to troll that place, then they go and post something nice about him. At the conclusion of the episode, the three basically agreed that what's done is done and that it's time to move on. Brandon's attitude in particular seemed to be something along the lines of, stop bringing up old shit. With that said, all parties did stick to their word, but the relationship between Bobby, Brandon, and Brian Callen has been irreparably damaged.
Whenever somebody's like, accuse me of something I didn't do, right? It feels like traumatic almost, like, because it's like the way they were talking, you know what I mean? It's like, they were like, bully is the wrong word, but they were just really adamant about it and they had a lot of feelings behind it.
I do have to mention that Khalyla did not come out of this unscathed. In the process of fans looking up information about Brandon hooking up with her, a lot of weird stuff was revealed about her own past, like weird. People showered her with the accusations of cheating on Bobby, manipulating him, and overall being a malicious sociopath, and the two would end their relationship soon after. It's ironic that in the process of dunking on Brandon, Khalyla ended up being viewed as somebody that's arguably worse. For Brandon himself, the fallout has been more subtle, but also palpable. Comedians began to much more openly disrespect him, joking about his terrible stand-up publicly.
Large fear. Yes. Do you respect Brendan Schaub as a comedian?
He was given the cold shoulder by Logan Paul and Mike Majlak, who were once friendly with him in what was probably the most awkward podcast appearance ever.
What? We gotta go to dinner.
Wait, right now?
I think so.
A 42-minute boys only episode? Is that how long?
His former employee, Mark Harley, dubbed BGL, or Big Gay Lion, by the subreddit because, well, did a podcast tour exposing him for everything from his drinking problem to still cheating on his wife before being exposed himself.
He's in front of my car. He's touching my car now. He's picking up my car. He's picking up my car. As you can see, he's picking up my car. He doesn't let me go. He hit it.
And even Joe Rogan seems to be distancing himself by not inviting Brandon to perform at his new Austin comedy club.
I was talking to Rogan this morning. I go, I cannot listen to another podcast of you and anyone you've had at the club, the mothership, and how fun it is.
I know.
It makes me want to jump off a bridge.
These days, it seems like Brandon just can't catch a break. His viewership is dwindling. His friends are either leaving for Texas or leaving his platform.
So what happened to the King and the Sting podcast? It's no longer?
The King and the Sting podcast. Yeah, the podcast is still going. I'm just not. I'm not doing
cool.
it.
You and Brandon are cool though, yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems to be open season on almost everything that he does. But does he deserve it? Look, Brandon Schaub has been a douche in the past. Yes, he's done things that are objectively bad and insensitive. But let's be real for a second here. Who hasn't? The problem with being in the public eye is that everything you do is magnified times a million. So that time that you got really emotional and mad at your ex and decided to post a drunken rant on your Instagram stories before deleting it in the morning is going to follow you for the rest of your life if you have a following.
Why are you going to leave me like that? What'd I do to you?
That time you bully somebody in high school because you wanted to fit in. That time you got snappy with the guy checking out your groceries because you were having a bad day. All of those moments will be compiled and used to judge your character. For the most part, there are no good and bad people. People who consider themselves good make bad decisions every single day. Major ones. You can meet the same person on two separate occasions and leave with a drastically different opinion of them depending on your mood, their mood, and the circumstances under which you're meeting. I worked in sales for years. It happened all the time. For the most part, the hate that Brandon receives is reactionary. He acts dumb and inconsiderate, and people make fun of him for it. But there is a small collection of people, particularly on the subreddit, that make it their life's mission to harass him. And they don't just attack him, but also his wife, his kids, his friends, and just about anyone that's ever been associated with him in any manner. It's malicious, it's weirdly personal, and overall just creepy and weird. And again, why him? Is he really the worst person in the world? Just off the top of my head, Mike Tyson, who the internet seems to currently be in love with, has both said and done things that make Schaub look like the most wholesome human on the planet. And I'm saying this as a fan, most of it is in his own autobiography. Maybe the reason why Brandon is hated is because he isn't apologetic. He doesn't admit when he's wrong. He's not introspective, and that drives people insane. But put yourself in his shoes. When you remove whatever celebrity he has left, he's just a regular guy living his life with the knowledge that a group of people is posting things about him, his family, and his friends 24/7, 365. They comment on his biggest mistakes, make fun of everything that he's proud of, and offend everyone that he loves and respects while staying anonymous themselves. How would you react? Are you that 1 out of a billion human being that doesn't have an ego at all and would just sit there and take it all in stride? Chances are you're not. You're a regular human being, kind of like Brandon. These days, it seems like Brendan just can't catch a break. His viewership... These days, it seems like Brendan just can't catch a break. His viewership... Oh, that was bad. Oh, that was bad. These days, it seems like Brandon just can't catch a break. His viewership is dwindling. These days, it seems like Brendan just can't catch a break. His viewership is dwindling. His friends are either leaving for Texas... Oh, come on. I'm not climbing under these wires.